Good evening and welcome to today's Tropics for June 3rd, 2020. Please note I am not a meteorologist and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storm I'm talking about. And for any decision making, please consult the National Hurricane Center or your local officials. So today I'm looking at Tropical Storm Cristobal right now. It has now gone inland into the Mexican coast after generally diving south slowly earlier today, and it has intensified since to or had intensified since to 60 miles an hour, but now weakened some as it's moved inland. And now we're getting really into the meat of the uncertainty right now. You can see the general spin. It's right now slightly inland near the Terminus Lagoon around here in the latest National Hurricane Center position. That was about an hour before this recording was taken. But it is trying actually to move over water again, strangely, even though it is expected to move a bit more south. And you can see that with this area of convection that's firing over the lagoon right now. It's pretty minor, though. It might not even do anything at all, but it is possible that it could tug the center, especially if it starts getting a bit more diffuse. And that could possibly mean a slightly more north track, but we'll have to see. But again, so these small track changes that could be caused by small mesoscale features, such as this burst of convection here, could possibly throw the global models off and cause a bit more of a northward movement than initially expected. And here's a look at the infrared imagery right now. And you can see that the general central convection has continued to weaken as, again, it is over land now. But you do see this small pinprick of convection in the lagoon right now. So I'll have to really monitor that to see if it tries to tug the center even just a little bit northeast, because any small northward movement might mean a slightly stronger cyclone as it does move north. But again, this is the meat of the uncertainty, so we just really have to keep track of how far south it moves. And so far, it has made landfall, as I said, so that part is baked in, obviously. But we'll have to check little mesoscale features like this, or stuff like shear that might suppress it a bit more to the south. As I've said many times, even during this storm itself, I love looking at the water vapor imagery because it gives you a really good picture even without having to look at or a good picture of the upper air features without really having to look at any other kind of maps. And here you can see there's a bit of a ridge in the west that gets replaced by a trough in the east that's currently in the Gulf of Mexico and looks to stay there due to an omega block. And then the resultant upper divergence up here on the divergent side of the upper trough. And here you can see some of the northwesterly winds on the west side of the upper trough is causing some convection to move to the southeast with the shear, and that contributed a bit to the movement towards the south earlier today, as it couldn't really overcome some of the other factors that were going on. And this upper trough will keep it in place for a long time. It's actually going to be one factor that might modulate the track and the intensity of Cristobal as it starts to move to the north. So right now, Cristobal is currently stuck between two ridges, one to the west that's generally centered over Mexico, and the usual subtropical ridge that has actually been weakened because there is a trough to the north, and this is the western part of large Atlantic omega block that is weakening this subtropical high in this area. And so the southerly flow is weakened, and as a result, it's basically roughly the same strength as this, as the ridge to the west. And as a result, you're not getting any really dominant ridge in regards to Cristobal. So it's kind of staying in a similar place. It's being moved around a bit by some factors like shear moving around the convection and the general monsoon gyre, and also some smaller mesoscale features. So there's a lot of smaller stuff that's moving it around. And again, this is why there is uncertainty in the first place. And if you, however, right now there's you can see again there's this upper trough, and this is going to be very important. It's currently centered in this analysis in the central to western Gulf of Mexico, and it is a part. It's a result of this upper ridge that is causing the flow to move a bit towards the south here and causing this upper trough. Now, while the GFS is just one model that has one solution, in this case, where Cristobal moves quite far inland into Mexico and even Guatemala, so that eventually the low-level center becomes diffuse and just becomes part of the broad monsoon gyre, which itself actually moves north into the Gulf Coast in the late weekend or even possibly early next week. But the thing I'm really looking at here right now is the features, and you can see that the ridge is a bit further north now as the omega block in the Atlantic starts to weaken. So you have this ridge becoming a bit more dominant. So you have some of that flow moving to the north a bit more than it is now. And so that means it can start moving north, or Cristobal, or what's left of it. Well, it can be able to start to move north now, as there's actually a dominant steering flow, and it's not being guided slowly by small-scale features. But still, of course, it is not very good to lean on one or the other model solution, but the Euro model shows something relatively similar at the same time frame on Friday in the afternoon, where the ridge starts to get dominant to the east, and then the gyre slash possibly Cristobal, depending on the track in the near the coast, will start to move a bit north with this ridge that is starting to become stronger as the trough from the omega block starts to lift away. Meanwhile, at 200 millibars, so this is the upper levels, a trough over this southwest coast has amplified the ridge in the midwestern part of the southwest, and as a result, you have this upper trough that has been in the Gulf of Mexico to amplify and slightly retrograde, and the upper divergence that is able to reach Cristobal a bit more effectively is also helping it move to the north, as all this upper divergence will attract the low with it, because the upper divergence means you have convection and surface convergence and lower pressures. So that means being attracted to other lower pressure, this low pressure will move towards that upper divergence. And again, for model agreement, there is still a relatively deep upper trough, but there is a bit less of that actual directional divergence in the Euro solution for the same time. So it'll still probably move north with the ridge, but this trough will also help it, but the degree to which is a bit uncertain, but it doesn't seem to be the main feature with this right now. As Cristobal or its remnants move up towards the Gulf Coast, there's been a trend towards a slight left turn, as it's not only being, as later on, it's not being steered solely by this mid-level ridge here, but a ridge starts to build in over the Midwest. So that means it tries to steer Cristobal or what's left to the east, but these will both try to steer at the same time. As a result, you might get a slight turn to the north-northwest with or putting together the vectors these both try to put on Cristobal. In the Gulf, it's likely that there will be a regeneration of some sort of tropical cyclone, but it might be weak, just because the conditions don't look all that good. it'll continue to move near the upper trough. That might impart some shear and possibly dry air into the core. So you might be looking at a sloppy tropical storm or possibly minimal hurricane if it gets a lot more organized in the forecast. But right now, it doesn't look to be one. And on the official forecast from National Hurricane Center, you can see that there's a slight leftward leaning as it gets near the Gulf Coast. So they're factoring in that ridge that starts to build in and tries to steer Cristobal east. And you can see it does look like there will be a tropical storm here, just because as it goes over water, there will be conditions favorable enough for at least regeneration as it moves off of land. And depending on where that is depending on how far inland it goes. There is notable uncertainty here. So we'll likely see a lot more certainty by Friday when it starts actually moving north. And by then, the forecast will get much higher confidence. But it does look like there will be at least a sloppy tropical storm that comes in. And as with these sloppy systems, they'll likely be east weighted. So you might see a lot more rain and impacts in general on the east side of the storm. So there could be some impacts on the west, but it definitely looks like there will be more impacts on the west. And you can see also it's uncertain where it will go. This is the usual 5-day uncertainties, and you can see it goes all the way from Houston to the western end of Alabama. So really, it's not too certain right now where it will make landfall, and this center position isn't where you want to look, but generally to the east is where you're going to see the maximum impacts. And since it is a weak storm, it does look like these impacts will be mostly some modest surge, but also a lot of rain, because these are usually sloppy, wet systems. And it doesn't seem that wind will be a major threat. Doesn't look to be a very strong hurricane, because the conditions just aren't favorable enough in the Gulf of Mexico, and it doesn't look like it will be organized enough to actually become one by the time it hits the Gulf Coast. Otherwise, there isn't too much going on in the tropics. If you have any questions or comments about my video, please let me know, and thanks for watching.